The Hollow Saint Saga II, the Temple of Gnawed Gods, Chapter 5, the Scriptorium of Flies, the monastery at Black Hollow had long since ceased to be a place of learning. Now it stood as a tomb built of books, where ink and bile ran side by side, and the wind turned pages no one dared to read. The stone arches, once white with lime, had darkened to a leprous yellow. The iconography etched into them angels, seraphs. Saints now appeared to weep rust and ash. Hieronym Acolyth approached this place of unsanctioned memory beneath a moon of withered bone, his shadow trailing behind him like the last prayer of a dead city. P bore a rusted censer clutched in one hand, swinging it with the same tired rhythm as a man recounting a grief that had long ceased to be hid. The other hand, trembling and calloused, held the remnants of his faith pages, from a scripture half-burned, the ink smeared with old blood and wine. Blackroot Hollow had not always been forsaken. Once it was a monastic citadel of the disciples of the Ninth Thought, a sect that preached the doctrine of undone flesh, their mission to strip the divine of illusion by peeling back the rot of language and revealing the sacred marrow of silence. For centuries, their scribes wrote endless texts meant never to be read, decoped, decayed, self-fungal theology, veined with mold, illustrated in ash, and signed with the breath of plague. Now it stood in perfect stillness, except for the buzzing. Flies. They were everywhere. Their wings shimmered with an oily luminescence, and their flight patterns formed sigils of disobedience. They swarmed the doors, clung to the altar stones, nested in the hollows of one's gleaming cruciform. Hieronym stepped through the threshold with a whispered apocryphon under his breath. Inside, the scriptorium reeked of wax, rot, and salt. Monks were still there, silent, breathing, blindfolded. Each had their tongue sewn in a red knot that protruded slightly from the lips, like a worm caught medis. They wrote seasons, dozens of them, hunched over ancient lecterns, scrawling on skin parchments, with quills dipped in black ichor. The sound of the quills scratching formed a rhythm, like teeth grinding in sleep. Hieronym watched them as he walked, monks tattooing words onto their own arms, monks carving ideograms into their backs with hooked blade, monks gnawing on bone as if to transcribe the marrow. In the center of the hall sat a dais of stitched leather and glistening cartilage. Upon it, enthroned, was the master of flies, a boy, no older than pale, cadaverous, crowned in lava that pulsed with transparent veins. His eyes were rolled white and milked over. His lips were stitched upward into a smile not made for joy. Despite his youth, his presence did not suggest innocence. It suggested the eternal recurrence of disease. Hieronym approached and knelt. "I seek the second reliquary," he said. The boy did not speak. Instead, the buzzing intensified until it formed a coherent frequency, not words, but intent, a mental colonization of thought. "You carry the first within you," the voice said, not in air but in nerve, Hieronym closed his eyes and saw fire. Fire that did not consume but revealed. Within it, saints walked backward, their faces covered in masks of their own skin. A cathedral rose in reverse, unbuilding itself into a cradle. He saw himself crucified, not on a cross, but on a wheel that turned in silence. He opened his eyes, furious. "You mistake vision for truth," he growled. "Truth without flesh is heresy." The boy wept fly. He emerged from his tear ducts in quiet ceremony and flew into the air in spirals. The monks halted their writing and began to moan. A moan that started low but crescendoed into something. Operatogra, wordless grief poured into sound. Hieronym stood healed and latched the censer and cast its contents upon the ground. Blessed oil, rendered from the fat of penitent kings. P set fire to the scriptorium. The parchment ignited first, curling and blackening with a scream. The monks did not flee. They knelt deeper. The flies swarmed upward in a vortex. By. The boy did not move, he merely smiled as the larvae on his scalp burst into flame. Hieronym turned, without watching them burn. Behind him, the scriptorium collapsed. Its screams turned to scripture, etched forever into the ash, carried by the wind. The bleeding reliquary beneath the guttering city of fire, where rain scabbed, the stone and sky hung low with rust. Hieronym Acolyth walked alone with fire in his lungs. The wind there did not howl. It recited names, condemnations, forgotten prayers, caught in its throat like fishhooks. Above him, the bell of St. Virago's cathedral had not tolled in 33 years. And yet it groaned, now in its tower, a sound like bones being ground in a pestle. He walked through alleys, bent like fractured spines, past facades that wept tar and effigies hung from rusted chains. Relic had long abandoned its gods, but not their rituals. The gutters bled, the lanterns whispered. A man had once told Hieronym this city could not die, because it no longer remembered how to live. By his destination lay beneath the seventh circle of its underworks, where the earth was veined with iron, and the breath of old saints lingered like rot in wet cloth. There, hidden in apostatic silence, stood the entrance to the reliquary, a vault locked, not by key, but by memory and pain. He carried both like a monk carries plague. The doorway was no more than a slab of obsidian ribbed in vein. No hinges, no markings, only a chalice of dried blood crusted to the stone, and a single line etched in the old liturgical script. Flesh remits what tongue cannot. Hieronym drew a dagger from the folds of his robe, not one of silver, but one carved of femur. With a hiss, he opened the skin of his palm, and let blood kiss the stone. Nothing. He gritted his teeth, drove the dagger deeper, and pressed his whole hand flat against the cold surface. Bit slab pulsed once, not visibly, but through the marrow. Then, with a groan that sounded like a cathedral, confessing its sins, it parted. A scent of iron and amniotic fluid spilled forth. Plum. The tunnel into the reliquary was steep and wet, lit only by the lucent spores that clung to the walls like dying thoughts. As he descended, Hieronym saw sigils etched into the stone in layers. The further down he went, the older the symbols became, until language itself unraveled into primitive runes. Finally, the passage widened. He emerged into a chamber that did not belong to time. It was circular, vast, and impossibly still. A silence so deep it made his ears ache. Bones formed. The ribbed arches above him, candles burned in tongues of blue flame. And there, in a triangle of raised daisies, the chalice of unbirth, sealed with waxy umbilical cords. The veil of the whispering sign, hovering in brine. Pall. And at the center, laid upon black water glass, a mirror that pulsed faintly like a living thing, which its frame was stitched leather. Its reflection was not fixed. Hieronym stepped forward. The relics recoiled slightly, as if aware. Blue voice, flayed and sexless, echoed through the chamber. Not spoken, inserted. You returned to the place you were erased. From the darkness behind the dais rose a being, neither angel nor demon, but Scott. Its body was pale as raw wax, marred by stitched-up mouths and closed eyelids. Across its skin, wings unfolded behind it, made not of feathers, but flensed scripture. This reliquary does not welcome thee. Hieronym bared his bleeding palm. I am not a thief, he said. I am what your silence left behind. The guardian said nothing. It bowed once and vanished. The mirror rippled. He stood before it now, the final relic. The glass of witnessing, though some texts named it the baptismal wound. Where a man saw himself, it showed what he had sacrificed to become that man. Hieronym saw not his face, but a child. His own eyes stared back, peas. His own voice cried out, muted by liturgical chants. The priests had spoken of ascension, but it was consumption they worshipped. He had died there. And yet he lived. The mirror cracked slightly. Then, from the surface, something stepped through. A figure, leaner, smoother, adorned in ecclesiastic robes, untouched by ash or blood. Hieronym, as he should have been, holy, powerful, preserved. You broke the covenant, the mirror Hieronym said. You abandoned the fire of purity for the cold light of question. I became real, Hieronym answered. You are a relic of fear. They did not fight with blade nor fist. They fought with memory. The chamber filled with screams, not theirs, but those they had silenced. Faces poured from the mirror, mouths bloated with unanswered prayers. Every lie Hieronym had told himself. I did what I must. I could not have saved them. The doctrine was flawed. They turned against him like teeth. He staggered, fell. The mirror Hieronym stood above him, eyes empty. You are the hollow saint, it said, because you let them carve you empty. No, he said, blood foaming at his lips. I emptied myself, so I could be filled with truth. And with that he drove the bone dagger into the mirror. It shattered in soundless light. Ply. When the vision cleared, he lay on the ground, gasping. The rosary lay beside him, 12 bone beads, each etched with the name of a saint who had begged for death. When he touched it, his skin blistered, not in pain, but in memory. He saw the past. He saw what was stolen from the world in the name of worship. He saw that to become sacred was to become preyed upon by those who called themselves divine. He wrapped the rosary around his hand, bone biting into flesh. The mirror was gone, big guardian silent. Bitchamber watched him, but it did not stop him as he turned and left. As he climbed back into the bleeding city, his footsteps echoed, not with victory, but with transformation. Hieronym Acolyth, once a priest, now a wound that walked, carried the second relic, and the wind, for the first time, spoke only his name. Chapter 7. The Choir of Skin. The path to the third relic led. Hieronym through a land where the sky bruised instead of burned, and the earth beneath his feet sighed. Trees bled, sap the color of clotted wine. Crows followed him, in silence. At the edge of the forgotten barony of Othmael, a cathedral rose not of stone, but of flesh. Veins writhed through its spires. A heart beat beneath its nave. Its bell tower screamed on the hour. He entered with his censer unlit. Within, he was swallowed by silence and musk. The walls breathed. The pews shifted. The stained glass windows wept serum. And at the altar stood a thing in the shape of a woman, her body flayed and bound in parchment. They called her the conductor. She raised her arms. They were strung with nerves like harp-string. Welcome, Hollow sang. She sang not with her voice, but with her wounds. Hieronym did not kneel. I've come for the saint of the drowned. She gestured. Their skins had been moved and stretched like this. They bore sutures as scripture. Every breath they took produced harmony and pain. To find the drowned, the conductor intoned. You must become the listener. Hieronym walked among them. Bit. Each voice was a scar. Each note a confession. He heard a woman forsake her firstborn for holy favor. A priest who baptized children in lies. A brother who broke bread with a demon. Pan. And at last he heard himself. A child on a rusted altar. A boy whispering doctrine through bloodied teeth. His knees gave way, but he did not fall. P stood in the center of the choir. Arms open, eyes wide. He listened until his name was no longer P. Listened until the song changed. Boo. The conductor approached, gently pressing her skinned palm to his brow. You have heard. Now remember. In a burst of crimson, a relic bloomed from her chest. A tongue, gold-pierced and bound in sacred chains. He took it, and with it, the silence shattered. Boof! The choir screamed and out in pain, but in joy. The cathedral convulsed. The walls collapse inward, as if exhaling centuries of secrecy. Hieronym walked out into the blood-wet dawn, relic in hand. A scream still echoing in his bone. The drowned were waiting. Chapter 8. The saint of the drowned knight had no place. Prath. The village lived in perpetual dusk, a gloom thickened by salt and rock. Here, the wind was a moan, and the sea, a graveyard with tides for hand. Hieronym arrived, undisguised that had forgotten light. The villagers did not greet him. Bay knelt along the shore, their mouths sewn shut with silver thread, their hands clutching pieces of coral and bone. Priests approached, faceless eyes erased, robes soaked with brine. He held out a relic, a child's jawbone, fossilized and wired with silver. It pulsed, it hummed, it sang to us. The priest rasped from a hidden mouth. It told us to listen. Hieronym took it. The moment it touched his skin, the sea stirred. Visions flooded him. Children swallowed by the tide, chanting hymns beneath the waves. Blith, their eyes open, mouths filled with kelp and prayers. Ships broken on invisible reefs. A temple carved in coral and sealed in silence. You built an altar to something that does not speak, Hieronym said breathless, and you mistook the quiet for mercy. The priest sank to his knees. The sea answered. From the shallows they rose, dozens of them, the drowned. Their skin was bloated, their eyes missing. Their jaws hung slack, tongues blackened by salt, but they sang gold. How they sang. The song was not in words, it was grief sharpened into sound. Hieronym stood firm. He lit his censer for the first time in days. He casts flame into the sea. The fire danced across the tide, oil-fed and wrathful. The drowned did not scream. They sank in silence, their hymn breaking into steam. The priest collapsed, unmade. The villagers vanished. No footsteps, no Chrysonely sought. Hieronym remained. He knelt and buried the jawbone in the sand. Let no child sing in silence. Again, he whispered. And as the waves receded, he turned to Waynut, west, not east, but inward. The third relic was his. Saga II was ended. But the crown had begun to bud. And across the spine of the continent, flies began to gather.